Greetings, loves. It is I, Tacticool Girlfriend. Welcome back to the channel. I hope everybody's doing well. So today I'm going to be talking about weapon failures. This is going to be a very generalized overview of weapon failures, how to identify them, and how to remedy them. This is not going to be a specific manual of arms for particular firearms as much as a very basic overview of common failures. I want to stress that you need to get very specialized training in whatever guns that you're using. Read your manual and train and train and train. This is not going to be a replacement for any of that. This is just an overview. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's start talking about weapon failures. While today's firearms are generally fairly reliable, made to exacting specifications using technologically advanced materials, nonetheless, a shooter probably at some point down the line is going to run into a malfunction. Being a competent shooter means being able to properly identify and safely address these malfunctions. That is why we need to carefully identify all of them before they ever happen in the first place and know how to properly address them. Now, before we start addressing particular failures, you nonetheless need to always know how to properly clear and make your gun safe. All these steps are going to have the same concepts. This is really basic manual of arms stuff, but it really bears repeating here. Okay, let's make this firearm safe. In order to do so, first of all, always point it in a safe direction. Even if you're clearing the gun, it needs to be pointed in a safe direction. If you are at a range, this is downrange. If you are anywhere else, it means the safest direction you can possibly point it. Then, if you have a safety, go ahead and engage it. Then release the source of feed, the magazine, the thing with the pew-pew pills in it. Put that down. Then lock the slide or bolt back. Next, we're going to inspect the chamber as well as the magazine well. I like to do this 3 times just to be very safe. Then release the slide or bolt forward, back into battery. Then what you can do is cycle it 1 more time, making sure that nothing ejects out of the chamber. If nothing did eject, then you are good. You should be clear. You can release the trigger at this time. For all intents and purposes, this gun is as safe as it basically gets, short of completely disassembling it. Now, before I get into the details of specific failures here, there is a really good immediate action drill that you should probably know. This is really helpful when time is of the essence and you're under pressure or whatever. This is going to take care of a lot of different failures. Not all, we'll go over that later, but this is very important to know and practice. It's called tap, rack, bang, and it's as simple as it sounds. First of all, if you experience a failure, you can hypothetically simply tap or slap the magazine with the palm of your hand so it's seated properly in case there was a failure with the magazine being seated properly. Then you can rack the slide or bolt back and release it, thereby ejecting the first round that may have been chambered, if there was one, and then feeding the second one, which theoretically should be now chambered. Then you simply go bang. It's as simple as that. Now, if your firearm still continues to not go bang, you've probably got some bigger issues on your hands, and you got to troubleshoot this further. Otherwise, you're just chasing your tail here. Also, a disclaimer, if for whatever reason you think that your barrel is obstructed by anything whatsoever, don't go bang here. You need to clear it first. I'll go over that soon. Okay, so if your firearm is continuing to experience failures here, it's time to dig in a little further. Every gun has its own design. There's inherent design flaws in every design, and there's tendencies for certain kinds of failures that you should be aware of. You need to know your gun inside and out. You need to be able to take it apart and understand how all the parts interact with each other. Also, pay very close attention to your gun's behavior. Use your senses. Be able to understand how your gun is supposed to feel and how it's supposed to sound whenever you cycle that action and shoot it. Anything from this is going to greatly inform and give you a head start in understanding what might be going wrong with it if something were to occur. Keep in mind that troubleshooting involves replicating the issue, isolating factors, experimenting, identifying the problem, and then fixing it. You need to make sure that you're carefully considering all the factors that may be contributing to every kind of failure and then going from there. Also, firearm maintenance, proper firearm maintenance, generally goes a very long way here. A lot of these failures can simply be avoided in the first place if you properly maintain your firearm. Please don't neglect your firearm. The first kind of failure you may run into, and it's one of the most common ones, is failure to feed. This is when a consecutive round fails to be loaded properly into the chamber. First thing you do is always make sure that the magazine is properly seated. Now, if you do have a round that has either been completely stripped off the magazine or is partially stripped off, you may need to actually remove the magazine first and then clear it if need be. Next, you're simply going to cycle the action of the firearm. This should load a new round into the chamber. If it doesn't, you probably got some bigger problems with your hardware. A lot of this can be due to the magazine, specifically loose feeding lips, damaged follower, or a weak spring. Also, your chamber just might be dirty, so make sure it's well maintained, lubricated, and cleaned. Furthermore, the ammo that you're using simply just may not be a good match for your firearm. Now, there are some other user errors that can happen here that will contribute to it, specifically riding the bolt or the slide forward. When you are loading the first round and you just simply let it go slowly while keeping your hand on the charging handle, or the slide in this case, your next round may not chamber properly. So make sure that you're actually letting it just slide forward. As such. Another common failure is double feed. That is when one round is chambered, or at least partially chambered, and another round actually tries to join it, and they both won't go into the same hole. You definitely don't want that. You want to make sure that each round is consecutively fired, ejected, and then another one is stripped off the magazine and loaded properly. If you do ever experience this issue, the solution is actually pretty simple. Generally, it's going to involve releasing the magazine first. Might be a little hard, you may need to manually remove it with a little bit of force, then charging the action and holding it open, letting the rounds fall out properly. One thing to note here, if you do have a spent casing that is stuck in the chamber and fails to extract, and then another round tries to load behind it, it's technically not a double feed. A double feed is with two live rounds trying to be loaded into the chamber at the same time. If you do experience a failure to extract, that's a totally different problem, which we will cover soon. Also, if this problem is recurring, you probably have a problem with your magazine, so take a very close look at that. Another kind of failure to feed might be short stroking, in which the first round ejects, but the second one does not actually get chambered properly. It's because your bolt or slide is not cycling fully back in order to properly strip off the top of the round on the magazine. In this case, you definitely want to make sure that your recoil spring is up to spec, that everything is well lubricated, and that your magazine is not interfering with the cycling of your action. Another kind of failure to feed is a lot like short stroking, but it's due to user error, and that's called limp wristing. With limp wristing, the shooter is shooting a handgun, and they have a poor stance and grip, and thereby not actually mitigating the recoil enough. With the recoil, the gun travels backwards, and the slide does not have enough inertia to properly cycle. This can induce an issue with extracting the first casing, and furthermore, it certainly would induce an issue with cycling properly and loading the next round into the chamber. Simply correct your stance and grip and make sure that the firearm is held firmly in place. Another failure to feed is one that's endemic to the AR platform, and that's called bolt override. In this case, there's actually a round that gets jammed up above the bolt, and then the bolt tries to strip another round and doesn't actually get to travel completely back into battery. In this case, this is kind of a big pain in the ass. You do want to remove the source of feed first. Shake whatever round you can to get out. See if you can pull the bolt back, but you probably can't. In this case, you'll actually need to manually push the bolt back with some sort of tool, either through the ejection port or the magazine well, all the way back until the bolt locks back properly. And once you do, then take the charging handle, push it forward, and that will clear the obstruction. Another common failure is failure to fire. In the most plainest terms, it's basically when you pull the trigger and the gun doesn't go bang. If there's a round chambered, then it has not properly fired. It's probably a light primer strike, so you should wait 15 to 30 seconds just to be sure in case there is a delay in the primer. Keep the gun pointed in a safe direction at all times. Keep it pointed downrange. Once you've waited 15 to 30 seconds, you can then extract the round. Once you do that, dispose of the round. Do not try to reuse it. If this issue is recurring, like I said, it might be due to faulty primers. You may have some bad ammo, so be sure to check your ammunition and try something else. Also, check your firing pin. Make sure that it's not damaged or fouled up. Also, check your action. Make sure that everything is going into battery, and then check your head spacing. Another kind of failure is technically a failure to fire. It's simply a failure to completely fire, and that's a squib. If a round does not completely exit the barrel, or a part of a round doesn't completely exit the barrel, this creates an obstruction in the barrel. This is extremely dangerous because it can cause a pressure buildup if you fire another round. That can thereby cause the gun to explode in your hands, and this is one of the reasons why we wear iPro. So it's very important to be aware of this kind of failure. If you feel that the recoil impulse of a shot was weird, or you heard a pop instead of a bang, you very well might have a squib. Do not try to fire another round. Do not tap, rack, bang this one. In this case, you're gonna have to put the gun on safe, clear it, take it apart, disassemble everything, and look down the barrel once it's completely clear. Then if you see the obstruction, simply take a rod and force the obstruction out. Only then can you continue to fire after reassembly. Another kind of failure is a failure to extract. In this case, you loaded the round, fired it, but you did not extract the spent casing. In this case, it can be as simple as manually cycling the action and then allowing the next round to get loaded properly. Now, if you're shooting a long gun and the action is jammed and it's not budging for whatever reason, you may need to mortar it. In this case, put the gun on safe, keep it pointed in a safe direction, and if you have a collapsible stock, make sure it's collapsed completely. Then you're going to apply backwards pressure with one of your hands on the bolt or charging handle and simultaneously slam the buttstock into a hard surface such as the ground. Eventually, this should create enough inertia that does shake the action free. If that doesn't do it, then you're probably going to need to take the whole thing apart and diagnose it further. Now, if cycling the action doesn't remedy the problem here, you're probably going to need to remove the magazine, lock the slide or bolt back, and visually inspect the chamber just to see what's going on. If you still see the casing in there, you're probably going to need to manually extract it. Use some sort of tool to pry it out. Don't ever use your fingers. Don't ever stick your fingers in the action. And just make sure that you're trying to be as safe as possible here. If that doesn't do the trick, you may need to completely disassemble your firearm to better access it. There's a lot of contributing factors to a failure to extract. Namely, it can be the ammunition that you're using, it could be the headspace, it could be a really gunked up chamber that needs to be cleaned, and it could be an obstruction on your ejection port or even your extractor itself. So make sure that you're very carefully inspecting all of those. Another common failure in failure to extract is going to be a stovepipe. In this case, the casing is not fully ejected and it actually gets trapped in the action halfway. Ends up looking like a stovepipe. In this case, in order to remedy it, simply turn the firearm sideways, cycle the action so that it falls free, and then load the next round. If this issue is recurring, it's likely due to the action not cycling properly. In this case, you do want to take a look at your recoil spring and make sure it's not too worn out. You want to make sure that your extractor is working properly. You want to make sure that your chamber is not too fouled up, that your firearm is properly cleaned and lubricated, and you also just might be using a bad batch of ammunition. Now, there are some other kinds of miscellaneous failures that you should still carefully consider here. They're not nearly as common, but some of them are really important to bear in mind. One of them is slam fire. Basically, when you are charging the action, loading a new round, without pulling the trigger, you may actually set off that round. This is especially dangerous because it always catches people off guard. This is why you keep your firearm always pointed in a safe direction, even and especially if you're loading it. If this problem is recurring, you really need to take a closer look at your firing pin and make sure things are spaced properly there and that it's engaging and disengaging properly. Another kind of failure is hammer follow. This is basically when the disconnector allows the hammer to follow the firing pin back in a battery upon loading a new round. This essentially turns your firearm into a fully automatic action. In this case, you'll definitely need to troubleshoot your disconnector as well as your entire fire control group. The last kind of failure I want to cover here is a very rare one, but it still bears mentioning, and that's out of battery. Basically, if your firearm's action is not completely closed into battery due to an obstruction or friction, and something just happens to pierce the primer of the next round, that can create an uncontained explosion. For obvious reasons, this is extremely dangerous. Firearms aren't able to contain something like that, and those don't mix very well with people. So unfortunately, there's not too much you can do about this other than making sure that your headspace is good, and also generally just make sure that your firearm is well maintained. As long as you're doing those things, this should pretty much never happen. Well, that wraps up my basic list of firearm failures. There's probably some more specific ones that are endemic to certain platforms I didn't get into, but this is a general baseline that I'm trying to cover here. Also want to end by saying that a lot of these failures are extremely avoidable so long as you're using good magazines, good ammunition, and good firearms. Also, so long as you're maintaining your firearms well, they should serve you well. If you need a gunsmith, don't be afraid to ask for help. Always make sure that your gats are well preserved. If you enjoyed this content, go and like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell too. If you have subscribed in the past, you may want to check again, as YouTube has been inexplicably unsubscribing people at random for no apparent reason, so just make sure that you check into it. Also, if you want to go contribute to this project, you can go to patreon.com/tacticalgf. This channel is not at all monetized. I don't run ads on it. Everything that you see here comes from viewers like you. So I greatly appreciate you all supporting me. If you want to check out the end of the video, you can see the names of my biggest contributors. Well, that's all I got for you today. I really appreciate you all tuning in. Please be good to each other out there. And as always, please take care. Bye!